Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today as we have a guest on the program. I think you'll find it quite interesting because we're going to be talking about politics, the upcoming elections. We're going to be talking about changing New York State, changing for the better. Let's have that conversation. And with me is my guest, Caleb Slater, who's going to be speaking about those very issues. Hello, Caleb. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
No, glad to have you here with us. For full disclosure, I do want to mention that I have met Caleb before. He is a candidate for the New York State Senate, the 48th District, which includes the region part of Syracuse, Auburn, and Baldwinsville. um, but I have met you before. I believe it was at an event, a anti-vax mandate protest. Is that correct?
Yeah, anti-vax, anti-lockdown, anti-freedom, however we want to word it. But yes, it was against the mandates that the state was imposing on people during COVID.
Yeah, and that was in 2022, correct? That was the protest. There were several. Might have been in 2021. I think it was 2022.
I don't think it was 22. I actually think it was 2021.
Okay, it was the earlier ones. There
Mhm.
were there were several, and
Yes.
but I do want to put out the full disclosure that we had met before, and that was the circumstance for that. Now, to just give the public a little bit of a background about you, I know you're 26. You used to go to Ithaca College.
Yep.
Um, you are a native of the Cayuga Onondaga region. And let's see, you've been with the College Republicans. You were part of the Ithaca College Republicans. I know you did that. You've also worked on several campaigns over the last couple of years for
Hmm.
Claudia Tenney when she was running for the New York 22. You worked
Hmm.
to help Brandon Wilkinson, who is in the new New York 22 after the congressional lines were changed.
Brandon Williams.
Brandon Williams, excuse me, Williams.
Yep.
Did I say Wilkinson? Sorry,
Yeah, that's
my
okay.
fault. Brandon Williams in the new New York 22 after the congressional lines were changed. And you've even been down in North Carolina working on the campaign for Ted Budd, excuse me, uh, who is now a senator in North Carolina. So you've had quite a few successes in the campaigns that you've worked with, although you also worked for a short time with Steve Wells when he was running on the primary for the New York 22. But you left there. And I'll get into asking you a question about that in a moment.
Sure.
But you've had a lot of success. You've had a lot of experience for 26, separate of all the work you've done in the private sector as well. So before we go into some of the details about that and what's coming up very shortly that I think people in all of Central New York will be interested about, let me first ask, it's the traditional question. Why are you doing this?
So, more broadly, why am I politically involved or why am I running? Because I can answer both questions.
Actually, both. Go right ahead.
Okay, so I'll start with, because we talked about my experience, and then we'll dovetail into what I'm doing going forward.
Sure.
Why am I getting involved? Well, I'm getting involved because I care deeply about the values of freedom. I am concerned about what's going on in our country. I'm concerned about what's going on in our state. I'm the grandson of a civil rights activist. My grandfather marched with Dr. King. He fought for me to have the freedoms that I have to be treated equally as anyone else in this country. And now, when I see things where people are being separated into categories, whether it's colleges that have their own graduations for Black students versus white students, when I'm seeing intersectional feminism putting people into boxes and defining them based off of their immutable characteristics, we're moving backwards in time. And the group of people, whether it's the libertarians, whether it's the conservatives, whether it's the Republicans, whether it's just non affiliated people like Joe Rogan, who are going out there and looking at people as individuals, that speaks to me. And I became initially involved in politics not as a politics major or as a business major, but as a film major who was on a campus that was so ingrained with the intersectional feminism and putting people into a box that I said, You know what? This is toxic. It's telling white students that they need to feel guilty for who they are, even though that they had nothing to do with Jim Crow or slavery. And it's telling black people that they're not going to achieve anything and that they can blame all of their hardships and failures on society. And that's setting them up for failure. And also, we need to set people up to be an entrepreneur. So that's how I got involved in those movements. And that's why I fought on that. And, I'll give you a moment to respond before I speak on what's going on
No,
next.
keep going.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. So in terms of what's going on next, yeah, I'm running for New York State Senate against Rachel May in the New York 48th District. And I decided to get involved with that after, as you mentioned, I've been the president of the Ithaca College Republicans. I was also the vice president of my college's Young Americans for Liberty chapter. I was the treasurer for the Students for Life chapter. I After that, did training with the Leadership Institute. I've done some amount of work with the Heritage Foundation. And as you said, I've worked on campaigns, grassroots for Claudia Tenney through Americans for Prosperity in 2018. I was at the Win at the Door program in another state through Young Americans for Liberty in 2019. We can get into my private sector experience as well. But in terms of politics, I was involved with both the Wells, Williams, and the Ted Budd races. And after taking that experience, taking that knowledge, being the former captain of my college's debate team, someone who formed a Discord on the importance of debate, and actually during COVID, I was with a group that every single Monday night we engaged in policy debates. So I've read up on these issues. I'm passionate about these issues. I'm concerned with the amount of central planning that we're seeing in New York. I'm concerned with what's happening with the rise in crime. I'm concerned with what's happening with the energy crisis, and I'm concerned with what's happening in our schools. And I haven't seen candidates that have been fighters that have the record like I have. And I said, well, I know how to win a campaign, so let's go in and do it. I'm ready.
Okay. Now, you mentioned education, and we're going to be speaking about that a little bit more because that dovetails to a future event that's going to be coming up, and I want to talk about that. But before I do that, let me first ask you, it sounds like, if I'm correct, you grew up in a traditionally more democratic family, democrat leaning family. Um, and yet you sound like, and your experience seems to show, you're more conservative leaning. How did that happen? Or more importantly, how have the family taken that?
That's a great question, Michael, and you're absolutely right. I'm one of maybe two Republicans, three at most in my entire family. My mother is a Democrat. She voted for Obama. She voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016, more so because she hated Hillary Clinton. But and in terms of how the family takes it, the black side of my family, because I'm black and Dominican, they laugh. They go, "I've never heard of a black Republican before," and I say, "Well, I think you need to open up your history books because that's where they all were. If you go back to the Reconstruction era, you go back to the abolitionist movement." Go look at Harriet Tubman, go look at Malcolm X, go look at many
Mhm.
of these other people, and you'll find that to be true. So that's the answer there. Now, in terms of how I reconcile with that, well, really, you'll find, especially amongst the Hispanic population, that the values that they share are conservative. I mean, I was taught to pray before every single meal by my mother and my other relatives, and I still do that to this day. The importance of faith is really, really strong. The importance of freedom. Like I said, I got relatives that were members of the civil rights movement and care about equality and care about our constitutional rights. And it was important to them that I watched movies like Roots and I paid attention to Black History Month and I paid attention to the civil rights era and I paid attention to those who fought for freedom. And I recognized that, listen, George Washington freed his slaves in his will because he knew that the slaves that were the people who were fighting on the front lines, the Black Americans, were fighting even harder than a lot of the white patriots. And he said, listen, if they could fight this hard for a nation that doesn't even see them as equals, they're more patriotic than anyone. So if you look at the values of the Hispanic population or the Black population, it's very faith centric. Many of them are pro life. Many of them are really in their values are more conservative than me. I mean, I've got relatives that are more against the same-sex marriage than I am. So it's a matter of not looking at party and let's look at values. And when you ask people not their party affiliation, but you ask them what they actually believe, you'll find that there's far more people that agree with the conservatives in the Black and Hispanic communities than we're led to believe.
Well, it's something that I've often mentioned, but it's always good to hear someone else's point of view and their experiences, because I agree with all of that. And historically, it is correct that
Mhm.
Blacks and Hispanics have almost always been traditionally more conservative. And pretty much up until the civil rights movement, they voted more conservatively as well.
And it's funny, if I could say one more thing on this,
Sure.
Michael. A big issue that is a lot of the people on the conservative side are talking about right now is medical freedom. And we first met when we were talking about the importance of medical freedom and the
Mhm.
skepticism of the state. Just before I did this interview, I was at a local barber, Black owned and operated. Everyone there was Black, and at some point in the conversation, the COVID shot got brought up,
Mhm.
and every single person in this barbershop, all of them are Black, no white people in this barbershop, were like, that was a scam, myocarditis, people are getting this heart issue. Black people were more skeptical of the COVID vaccine than Republicans were. There was a big initiative to try and get Black people to get the shot, because if you ask them about where they feel about if the government has their best interests at heart, they'll tell you no. They'll bring up things like the syphilis shot that was brought up to Black
Tuskegee.
Americans. Tuskegee, yep, they'll
Mhm.
bring that up. They'll bring up so many other examples. So they got it at a lower rate. And now we're seeing that a lot of the things that people said during 2020 turning out to be true. I mean, I saw a study recently that now Black Americans have less heart issues than any other group in the nation. Is that a coincidence? Is that just a correlation? We'll find out and see. We're now seeing I think it was the FBI and another department said that they now believe that COVID did come from a lab in Wuhan in
Department
China.
of Energy.
The Department of Energy. Yep, the
Mhm.
Department of Energy just said it, and I just read that the FBI is going along with that too. So a lot of the things that people like you or I were laughed at about 3 years ago, it's turning out to be, well, actually, there was a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. It is interesting that a lot of people are, well, let's understand, and I have to say for the censors out there that, of course, we're not doctors or scientists. We're not giving anyone medical advice, nor are we trying to decide science. This is obviously a conversation and should be taken as such. I hate that I have to put that stupid disclaimer still to this day in videos that I do. I apologize for that. But
Mhm.
it shouldn't be surprising considering that the jab, the vaccine, is experimental. I mean, it
Right,
was the fastest development of a vaccine or a medication that was introduced to the public in the history of medications. The entire FDA process takes on a fast track 7 years, and this was done in several months. So
right.
we shouldn't be surprised that we don't know about the side effects. Most drugs do have side effects, but there are unknown ones, and they are affecting a swath of people.
Mhm.
And as you said correctly, we will learn more about this as the resulting side effects become more and more apparent over time.
Right.
A little different than your conversation you had with WAUB or with WTQ. By the way, I should give a shout out to my friends in WTQ Talk of the Town. I've been on there. They're good guys. And it sounds like you had a really good conversation with them. In fact, it was another one of the issues. Obviously, the vaccine mandates, medical freedom of choice for Americans is important. But you were talking about energy when you were on
Yes.
WTQ. And
Yes.
that was at the beginning of this year. You seem to be against the movement to electric stoves and all electric devices. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, and I thank you for doing your homework and asking me about that. That is a top three issue for me and my campaign is stopping these infringements on freedom, on the markets, on choices. When we look at the forced electrification of the state from the state, there's a couple of issues wrong with it. For starters, our grid system just can't handle it. The NYSIO, the New York State System Independent Operators that oversee our grid, said that we need over 100 I think it's over 100 gigawatts of power at minimum to be able to fulfill the needs that are being right now sustained through fossil fuels. And every single person, including my opponent Rachel May, who's an advocate for this electrification of our state, doesn't have an answer as to where that's going to come from. And if you look at areas like where you're at in Broome County or where I'm at in Onondaga County, or especially in Western New York, people can't afford to not have reliable heat in our state. I mean, we're not in Texas. This is a very cold state in the wintertime, and people will freeze and people will suffer the consequences because of it. So that's one of my arguments, is that the grid system can't handle it. But the second one is that this is just an infringement on freedom. If people want to choose electric, they should have every right to do it. But if they don't want to do it, then they shouldn't be forced to do it. And the other thing, from a cost standpoint, is if you eliminate all other forms of energy in the marketplace, you're going to have a monopoly. And the electric companies are going to be able to charge people whatever they want to charge people. And the only way that you can address that then is through price control. So what we're saying is that the government is going to create a problem, and then there's going to try to solve a problem that they created. I could spend all day talking about this, but the reality is that this is something that everyone in our state should be concerned about.
No, it's something I'm very concerned about. I know New York State has published that they only have projections for the next 7 years, once going to all electric. And at year 7, 8, 9, 10, and on to the future, they have no idea where they're going to get the energy they need. It's at least a gap of 10 to 15% from year 7 going forward. So it is a serious concern. And solar and wind, even according to New York State, will not make up that difference.
No.
So that's the important thing. Now, we've covered a couple of the issues, but one of the issues that you are also running on is that you have a pro-life stance. You're against bail reform. You're pro-Second Amendment. You're pro-First Amendment. In fact, you were invited to the White House in, I believe, 2017 for the signing of Executive Order 13798, which was to expand the free speech on college campuses. Am I correct on that?
You're absolutely correct on that, and I'll start with that and move my way backwards. So we'll start with freedom of speech. That's something that I've always been very passionate about, and we'll talk more about how that relates to this event that I'm organizing in a moment. But it's critical. I mean, we need to have debate. We need to have discussion. We need to have opposing viewpoints allowed in the marketplace. I strongly stand with the belief that I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. One of my favorite Supreme Court cases, my minor in college was legal studies, so I studied many speech issues, and Texas versus Johnson is one of my favorite cases. Antonin Scalia wrote the opinion for it. And that was the case that made it permissible for political speech to be able to burn the American flag. And that's not something that I'm comfortable with. It's not something that I endorse. It's not something that I support. But what Scalia wrote in his opinion is that this type of action is what puts our American ideals at really in question. You know, speech, the First Amendment is not there to protect speech that is popular. No one's going to try and go after speech that's popular. It's there to protect things that are unpopular. It's there to protect the type of speech that makes us uncomfortable. And for someone like Scalia to be able to put it, and he put it in way more eloquent ways than I can on this podcast here, or this interview here. But I stood for that. And so when I was the president of the Ithaca College Republicans, I did many events on the free speech. We had Dave Rubin come to campus, and we did a event with, we had a conservative, a libertarian, and a liberal all on stage talking about, from a different lens, the importance of free speech. That was attended by hundreds of people. And I was the only person, when this college was looking at updating their speech codes, that wasn't a part of student government or wasn't a part of the administration, that was invited to those conversations. And we did change part of the speech codes. And because of that work and standing up for the student rights of not just people that I agree with, people that I don't agree with, President Trump and his team recognized that. And I was invited to the White House for that signing.
That's got to be impressive. I mean, who gets invited to the White House? So few people. It is a very special moment, I would imagine. And it's a piece of history. It really is. Sorry, I have a slight cold.
That's okay. I want to speak on some of the other issues that you mentioned. That's okay. A big one is definitely crime. We talk about crime, we look at it from a bunch of different lenses. But first of all, New York has a rise and a spike everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in Syracuse, Rochester, Albany, Buffalo, Long Island, Manhattan, the numbers have gone up. And it's really because of incompetent laws from the people in Albany, whether it be bail reform that make it so that somebody who is committing a property crime doesn't get held for bail, whether it's removing the judicial discretion that people on the local level get to decide what's best for them, or even what we're seeing is this raise the age legislation where if you're under the age of 18 you can't be prosecuted. So there was two cases that I want to bring up that happened in Syracuse recently from raise the age, because that's what's really affecting the central.
Now you're back.
Can you hear me?
Now you're
I'm
back.
back. Okay, yeah. So the first example just happened in the last week. There was somebody that did a shooting, or shots were fired in, some will call it the Carousel Mall, others will call it Destiny, depending on the age of your audience. Um, Nobody got hit. The person threw the gun in the trash can and fled away. We now learned, it just broke today, it was a 14-year-old boy who did that. 14 years old.
That's
Person's they're not getting the gun from the store. They're getting it illegally and they can't even be charged properly. The second person, and the second example that I have to give you is of the 11-year-old girl who was just recently killed in a drive-by shooting in January. The person who did that shooting, 16 years old. It was either 15 or 16, and that person was let out of a detention facility for gun charges a year ago. And now we've learned that law enforcement specifically asked the facility not to release this person because of their access to a gun and their threat to society. So we're seeing the people who are dealing with the crime, whether it's the DAs, whether it's the police officers, whether it's the people who live in these communities saying, listen, we know who's doing this crime, we know where it's happening, and yet our politicians in Albany are passing this legislation for whatever reason they think is best that is making our streets less safe. And that's something that's going to unify people. If you look at the election that just happened in Chicago, Lori Lightfoot just lost 17% of she lost 83% of the vote didn't go to her as an incumbent. And it's not because of identity politics, and it's not because of one thing or another. The reality is that people want safe streets, and it doesn't matter your political affiliation.
No, I would agree with that. And that tends to be very true. And Lori Lightfoot is a great example in the ultra blue Chicago, losing by 67% to other Democrats. It wasn't a choice of whether she's a Democrat or not, or I've seen she's now said that it's because she was a black woman why she lost, most recently reported. I don't think that's the case. I think it's because of what she did and how effective she was. But that brings us to the question about issues that are affecting us in our communities. And that brings me to what you're going to be doing very soon. Now, I should mention, and I will, of course, have links in the video and in the description of your website, which is Caleb Slater for Senate, which is votecalebslater.com, and people will be able to see that. But you're doing something that's very unique. You've gone to Utica and in Oneida County. You were speaking there in January. You recently were speaking on Finger Lakes News Radio. You're now coming down in the next couple of days, in about a week and a half, to Broome County, to the Binghamton region, Endwell to be specific. Why? Why would you do that?
That's a great question. While it's important to reach voters, obviously, that are in my district, which is Cayuga and Onondaga County, it's also important to understand that when people are running for state senate or state assembly, they have a responsibility that encompasses the entire state. Any legislation that I pass or block affects Broome County. It affects Oneida County. It affects, the southern tier part of the state, areas like Chemung. So being able to speak to voters in different areas and understand the perspective of different areas is going to make me most equipped and qualified to be able to address all sorts of bills that are going to come in front of me in the New York State Senate. And I also don't want to miss an opportunity to be able to help. At the end of the day, I'm a grassroots guy, and I've been that much longer than I've been a candidate for office. And so when we talk about what's happening in the school in Endwell and Broome County, that's something that could impact any part of the state, and being able to help the parents and help the community and being able to fight back against what they're seeing in their school, which I guess I'll let you introduce that, can serve as a model for people throughout our state to be able to follow.
Okay. Just to let everyone know, what we're speaking about is on February 16th, there was a uproar in Broome County, and specifically in Endwell. The main Endwell school district, the Homer Brinker Elementary School, parents were surprised because their kids came home and were given a flyer. The flyer was from a satanic cult, or I should say, the Satanic Temple and Reason Alliance, as they are properly noted. It's a satanic group. And they were asking children, and therefore their parents as well, the opportunity to go after school on March 16th to join their after school Satan Club, ASSC. And as you might imagine, there was quite an uproar. Many parents were upset and confused and unsure why this was allowed to happen. The answer from the school system itself was that their choice was to either shut down all clubs or to allow the Satanic Club to make the offer to have children join in to their ideology, as I can say. Now, I know that you've mentioned to me, and one of the reasons why we're speaking today is because you oppose this.
Correct.
Please give us some details on what you think about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as soon as I was notified of this occurrence, which was that night, Thursday, February 16th, I immediately sprung into action. I reached out to the parents who shared this to understand everything that I can before I make any statement or any next moves. The next week, I happened to have been in Broome County anyway for the Lincoln Day dinner that the Broome County Republicans were hosting. And I said, well, let me meet with some of these parents. So I met with them and learned their story. And here's what I've gathered, and then I'll talk into what I'm doing. There was a Christian organization, the Good News Club, that had an after school program for prayer in this elementary school. They were renting out the facility. It was, to my understanding, not supported or endorsed by the faculty, but it's a public space, so anybody can use it.
Correct.
The Satanic Temple learned that this Christian group was involved in a public school. They weren't a fan of that, and so they formed this counter. Now, there's a FOIL request to learn if it was a parent that in fact filed the paperwork, or if it was, as I'm hearing rumors, somebody from not even within your community that was sent in by the Satanic Temple to file the paperwork. I don't know which one is true right now, so I don't want to make a statement on either one, but we are investigating that to find out. Here's what I do know is the Satanic Temple tries to be a provocateur in communities where they see that Christian theology is on the rise, and they try to get canceled in order to then use that same power from the state to cancel the Christians. So there have been examples where a Ten Commandment statue or a manger statue goes up, and then they bring in their goat with the demon horns. The Christians get upset, say, take this down. I don't want to look at this. This isn't aligned with my values. It gets taken down. And then they go to whether it's the city, the county, or the state and say, if we can't have our First Amendment rights to free expression and freedom of religion, they can't either, because you're not supposed to discriminate against content. And from a constitutional standpoint, they are correct about that. And there's a very good possibility that they're trying to do the same thing in Broome County. So after learning that, I said, well, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And as I said earlier in the program, I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in a true marketplace of ideas and faith. And so what I've devised is a counter event. If they're meeting in the gym after school till 4:35, then we're going to be meeting in the quad outside the school after school until 5:30 to give an extra hour, because maybe there's some students who are leaving that event and we have an opportunity to tell them. And it's, before I even say it, it's unbelievable that I have to say this. Satan was the bad guy. God was the good guy.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. And that's the reality that we're in right now, is that you have to debate on things that people knew were a given before. So some people are going to say, Caleb, you're for censorship, you're for using the power of the state. That's not what I'm doing. I want to be clear about that. I'm doing a counter event for people to hear a different perspective. And hopefully by doing that, and I'll let you get your question here, then the community and the Satanists will see, yeah, in this community, Jesus has a better following than Satanists. And who knows? The power of the Holy Ghost is so powerful. Maybe they'll convert to Christianity as well. Go ahead.
Well, all things are possible, but I want to be very clear. Is the purpose or are you planning to allow the children to go into the club to find out about the club? Or is this meant to stop them from going in? I want to be clear because I know many people will ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you allowing kids to go to the Satan Club? Are you trying to intimidate those kids from going in there?
Well, there's not much that I can do in terms of an intimidation or a stopping. In terms of what I'm trying to do, I would say, I want them to hear our side and come and be converted to our side over the other side. They have the freedom to do what they feel is best for them to do. But in terms of stopping the Satanists, I'm stopping them intellectually, I'm stopping them ideologically. And I don't want, I mean, I just bluntly, I don't want any kid going to the satanic group because I don't see any value in that.
Well, let me explain what I mean. When
Hmm.
most people are thinking about protests, they
Hmm.
think of the abortion clinics where we see the far left go in and they're screaming, they're shouting, even the far right. They try to make it seem like there's someone screaming, shouting. If we look at BLM, any of the events by BLM, in fact, in Broome County, most recently on February 1st, BLM went to a parking lot of the supermarket Wegmans and on private property and confronted people as they were exiting the store, shouting at them, telling them that they have to accept the ideals of BLM. BLM has also gone out and Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow during parades, Christmas Day, the October uh, Columbus Day parade. And they've gone and they've hijacked that, stopping the entire parade, screaming at people to accept and follow their ideology. So when I say, is the protest going to stop the children, I'm speaking about as the examples that we have seen from BLM, from Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, where there is an active intrusion preventing people from expressing themselves. Is that the intent?
I wouldn't say that that was the intent. I mean, if there's an opportunity to engage in a dialogue with the Satanists or the students before they go in and urge them not to, just as people who are, sidewalk counselors and try to provide another option before
Mhm.
someone walks into a Planned Parenthood, um, then I could see the rationale for doing that. We'll
Okay, so
really
it's
see
not
how it
force.
plays out.
It's not force. It's an option. It's a question. You're
Yeah, it's
giving
a
them an
question.
option. Okay.
I'm giving them an option. I'm not gonna. I definitely do not advocate for violence.
That's the clarification I wanted because, again, people today, when they see, when they hear about protests, they think BLM. They think of the riots in 2020.
Hmm.
So that's why I wanted to make it very clear for people what is your intention? What are you looking to do? Which is very different. And I think reasonable people would have assumed that anyway. But again, as you mentioned, we're in 2023 and we have to explain things that are obvious or should be obvious.
Right.
So yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazy world. But I don't think there's anything wrong with presenting people with other options and saying, hey, you don't have to do this, or that there is another side to this that you can hear about. I'm just surprised. Are you worried at all about how this may reflect on your run for politics? I mean, many politicians are afraid to do anything that touches on religion or might be a hot button issue in any community. God knows many of the Democrats in New York want to make sure that they don't offend anyone ever at any time on any subject, unless they're, white males or Republicans. What do you?
Michael, I'm glad that you asked that question because most people running for office, I would say over 90%, would not be doing what I'm doing for two reasons. Number one, it's a hot button issue. It's a culture war issue. It's a religion issue. It's a contentious issue. It's something that could divide and alienate voters. And number two, it's not in the district. So a lot of politicians, if the person can't vote for you, they put a blind eye. But I'm not a politician. Okay, I'm a fighter for freedom. And when it comes to the first issue about is it too divisive, in my conversations, grassroots, whether it's door knocking, whether it's on the phone with potential voters and donors, they are sick and tired of the fact that the Republican Party doesn't have fighters. The Democrats, whether you like their ideology or not, you just mentioned examples where they have people on the ground that are fighters. You know, there's no doubt that AOC will put up a performance art. She'll
True.
pretend to get arrested. Um, in order to make a point, and that'll get the headlines and that'll get people's attention on the issues that matter to her. We don't have people enough in our movement that are fighters, that are going to stand up for the things that matter to us. So I want voters to understand that with me, it's a breath of fresh air. I'm not a career politician. I'm not your typical person. I come from the grassroots side of things, and I will always be a fighter. I will always stand beside you on the front lines, in the trenches, in the pockets. So am I concerned? I think there's a possibility that someone might try to take it out of context, but I think overwhelmingly, since this is such an extreme example, most people, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but most people don't put whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, or hate politics. They don't send their kid on the bus to first grade, elementary school, to get recruited by the Satanic Temple.
No, that's not what I've had the experience in 55 years of life to know. That's not something that's normal.
So I would say that this case is such an extreme example that people are going to be more emotionally outraged by what we're protesting against. That's a reality. I mean, I've got the flyer right here. I mean, there's a picture of their logo, right? Do I feel that this is going to negatively impact my campaign? And my response to that is there's a possibility it might, but I think overwhelmingly people who are upset with the system, who are upset with the fact that candidates give lip service and they don't actually do something, they're going to see that I'm somebody who is willing to do things even if there's no benefit to me. I mean, this isn't in my district. I'm not going to earn any votes from the parents that are joining me in this protest for doing it, but I'm doing it because I stand on what's right. And I'm concerned with what's happening in our state. And if it's happening in Broome County, it can happen in Cayuga and Onondaga County. And I think voters who see this and see what I'm doing are going to recognize that I'm the real deal. I'm a candidate who backs what I say I'm going to do, and I'm never going to squish, and I'm never going to stop fighting.
Okay. Let me ask you this in summing up. Obviously, this is a race that's not going to happen until 2024. You're well ahead of many people in announcing that you're going to be running for the next election. It's not 2023, it's 2024. And I noticed that on your website, you don't have a lot of positions. You don't have your positions up yet. I imagine that over the next year, you're going to be giving us more details on some of the policies, some of the issues that you're going to be promoting. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have a list of positions that I'm running on. The reality is that these websites cost money, and I'm in the early stages of my campaign. I'm being very cautious with how I'm spending the money. It's going to cost about $2,000 to finish the developing of our website. So if people like what they heard in this interview, I encourage you to go to votecalebslater.com/donate and help empower the cost of getting those positions up there. That's the first point. The second point to your question about getting them out to the public, absolutely. That's why I'm going to continue to do events. That's why I'm going to continue to do media hits. I'm not going anywhere. And I think on the interview that I did on Finger Lakes News Radio, they asked why I was getting in this race so early. The reality is that you have to. If you really want to build a connection with the voters in an area that's as big as my district, you got to start early and you got to make it not about you and make it about the community because we are here for service and we are here to understand what matters to them. Lee Zeldin did that. He jumped in the race. He announced April 2021 that he was going to be running for governor in 2022. And he turned a plus 20 state into a plus 5 state because he built those connections. So if he can do that across the state that is overwhelmingly blue, imagine what someone like me can do jumping in the race early in a district that last time around would have gone red if there wasn't ticket splitting.
Well, In fact, I know that there have been a lot of changes. The 48th Senate District in New York is a new district. It was a creation because of the congressional lines changing. So it's a very new district for many people, although it may again be changed because many people may not be aware. They haven't finished correcting the lines in all the districts. They stopped because the election for 2022 happened. They have to finish that job. So the lines may change again, which is just crazy and hectic. But given that, I want to ask one final question about that. If they redo the lines yet again, and the current 48th district changes somewhat, but yet still contains.
I'm sorry, Michael, but your
Yeah.
signal is going bad. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
We've seen that the congressional lines have been changing. They didn't finish the job in 2022. They stopped so that we could have the election. And they're going back now to redo the lines. My question would be, if the lines change, are you still going to run even if the 48th district is slightly different? Maybe it doesn't have Syracuse in it. Maybe it has a little bit more of a Cayuga or Onondaga. If it's slightly different shaped, are you running to run against Rachel May, or are you running for the issues?
That's a wonderful question, and I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I don't think that Rachel May has provided value to this state. Her getting out of office would be a monumental improvement to New York State, and I am in part running against her, but I'm also running because I have solutions that will help our communities. Whether Syracuse is in the mix or it's not in the mix, whether it's a different part of Onondaga County, whether it's Cayuga County, listen, I've been a New Yorker my whole life. I've lived in Cayuga County for a total of almost 5 years. I've lived in Onondaga County for several years. I'm running on issues that hit all areas of central New York. Cayuga County had a record number of homicides last year that they normally see over multiple years. Onondaga County, people are all around the area are going to be negatively impacted by this radical Green New Deal agenda. People all around the county could benefit from a freer market and more constitutional freedoms allowed and allocated to them. So no matter how the maps get drawn, I'm here. I'm not a quitter. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying into this fight. And whether it turns more red or it turns blue, I'm up for the fight because the reality is when we talk to people about their values and we step away from the party and we talk about what's concerning to them, you'll find that a lot of people, and I'm amazed even this early on, how many people are excited about this campaign and excited to see what we can do. So we're going to stay in this and we're going to fight for New Yorkers.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I thank you for the time that you've given us to find out about you. And I don't think this will be the last time that we're speaking. Of course, we're going to try and be down on March 16th at Endwell schools to find out what's going on there and to see the protest. But we look forward also to hearing more from you as the campaign goes further, as you have more information to share with us. I want to thank you, Caleb Slater, for taking a moment to share with us why you're running and to let people know that they can, again, get in touch with you at Caleb Slater for Senate. Again, that website is, I had it right in front of me and there it is, votecalebslater.com. And again, I will have that in both the description and in the video at the end. Is there any final thought that you would like to mention at this time that I haven't asked you about or we haven't had a chance to discuss?
I would say more broadly, people can go to votecalebslater.com, or if they want to send our campaign a message. I know a lot of people are on social media. You can find me facebook.com/Slater for Senate. That's facebook.com/Slater for Senate. And I'm happy to answer any questions from any of your listeners. I'm happy to do another interview with you, Michael. I look forward to seeing you 2 weeks from today on the 16th. And we're going to continue to do things around the state. Whenever we see something going on, we're going to jump on it. I'll say, one final thing. I don't have enough to talk about it in this interview, but this Sunday I'll be taking a trip to East Palestine, Ohio, to
Oh,
understand what's going on over there. because that spill and that issue, the chemicals are making their way up to upstate New York. So I'd like to understand how that's affecting not just Ohio, but Pennsylvania, New York, and other places too. So again, just showing you that I'm the type of person who's not going to sit in a box and not just do what advisors tell me to do. But if there's something going on that's hurting our community, I want to be right there on the ground and understand it.
Well, I am definitely looking forward to following up with you about what happened in East Palestine, because obviously the weather patterns, the fallout from the burning chemicals will come to New York State. They are coming to Pennsylvania. It is getting into our water table. So it is a very important issue. So I do look forward to hearing what you have to say and what you're able to find out about that. We're going to have a lot to talk about in 2 weeks. But until that time, I want to thank you. I want you to be well. And I want everyone to remember to check out his website and to find out more about his campaign. And remember, every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you where you get to call in, leave your tweets and chats from anywhere in the world to tell us what you think is important, because the First Amendment isn't just for Americans, it's for everyone and everything that affects us all. I thank you, and I hope you'll be well.
Thank you so much. Take care.